I was in the Alaskan wilderness. The bone-chilling, terrifying thing we discovered at 3 a.m. The icy breath of the Alaskan wilderness wraps around you like a ghostly shroud. It's 3 a.m., the time when darkness feels alive, pulsing with secrets. The sky is an endless ocean of black, punctuated by the piercing cold stars that seem to watch with hungry eyes. That's when the scream cut through the stillness. It wasn't a normal scream, it sounded raw, primal, echoing through the sharp air, instilling a terror that sank deep into the bones as they huddled by the campfire. Shadows danced across their faces, illuminating fear in wide eyes. The fire crackled and spat, casting eerie shapes that twisted and flickered. Around them, the wilderness held its breath, playing tricks with the mind. Was that a whisper? A branch snapping? The sound of something moving just outside the flickering light? Every snap, every rustle pulled at the threads of their sanity, tightening the fear in their chests. The uncanny quiet that followed the scream felt like a predator prowling, biding its time. Underneath the surface of that serene night, deeply buried mysteries lurked. Just days before, they'd stumbled upon an old cabin, half swallowed by the encroaching forest, its walls splintered and windows shattered. Upon exploring it, they found the walls covered in strange symbols, carvings of things that twisted the stomach. They were almost distorted, like remnants from another world. Something ancient and dark breathed in the depths of that cabin. It whispered to them, weaving promises of the unknown, yet the urge to leave was overwhelming. A chill raced down her spine, as she realized she wasn't the only one feeling it. The others fidgeted nervously, shooting glances into the dark where the trees stood, tall and indifferent like sentinels guarding great, dark secrets. Just then, a low growl echoed through the clearing, swirling dread around them. Was it an animal, or something more sinister? Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon, and while you're there, smash that like button, it really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. As the fire crackled, illuminating their terrified faces, a shadow passed behind the trees, fleeting but unmistakable. It was bigger than any animal they knew, moving with a grace that made the air feel heavy. The world around them felt like it was holding its breath. With danger lurking just beyond the firelight, they huddled closer, hearts racing. What if whatever lived out there was drawn to their fear? The screaming echoed back in their minds. And then, the forest let out a howl, a bone-chilling sound that wasn't quite animal, but something altogether different. What had they awakened in the dark? The howl bled into the night air, a haunting symphony that slithered beneath their skin and lodged itself deep in their throats. Each of them froze, the light from the campfire flickering wildly, as if desperate to ward off whatever shadow had crept into their midst. The growl followed it, lower this time, rumbling with menace. It was a sound they couldn't shake, deep and throaty like a beast that had not eaten in days. What was that? Sarah whispered, her voice shaky, her eyes darting from one tree to another. Her fingers gripped the edge of a log, knuckles white, visibly trembling. Probably just a wolf, Mark replied, but his voice lacked conviction. He was the bravest among them, but even he couldn't disguise the flicker of fear in his gaze. No wolf ever howled like that. Dan's face paled. He leaned in toward the fire, its warm glow a fragile barrier against the darkness. We should pack up. Get out of here now. Panic colored his words, setting off unspoken agreements among them. There was a tension thick enough to cut, but before anyone could respond, a rustling erupted from the thicket, louder and closer. Each sound amplified in their terrified minds, pulsing with the certainty that whatever it was had intentions far beyond mere curiosity. Stay quiet, whispered Sarah, voice barely audible. It was as if she thought that in silence they might avoid detection. But that instinct felt doomed. They were already marked prey. Then, from the inky shadows, emerged a shape tall and gaunt, with elongated limbs that stretched impossibly beneath the muted light of the fire. They could hardly breathe as they stared at it, frozen in a mix of horror and disbelief. It regarded them with hollow eyes, deep enough to swallow the last ounce of hope they might have clung to. An understanding hung between them. This was not an animal of this earth, but a grotesque reflection of nightmares. "Back away!" Mark suddenly shouted, breaking the paralyzing hold of fear. He sprung to his feet, brandishing a stick like a weapon, a pathetic gesture against the unknown. Yet he took a step forward, urging the others behind him. "Get to the cabin." The thing blinked, slowly, and its mouth parted in a grotesque semblance of a smile. The sound it made next was a mix of laughter and a growl, slithering into their minds in ways they could not comprehend. It taunted them, teasing their sanity even further. As they stumbled back towards the cabin, Dan tripped, catching himself just in time to avoid falling into the dark. His heart pounded in his chest. They could hear it echoing back through the emptiness. "It's following us," he cried out in sheer terror. They barreled forward, crashing through the underbrush, branches scratching at their faces and limbs like spectral fingers reaching out from the depths of the forest. The call of the creature nipped at their heels, urging them into a frenzied sprint. Inside the cabin, they slammed the door shut behind them, panting hard against the walls, feeling the worn, splintered wood vibrate with their racing hearts. A cold draft whipped through the cracks, amplifying their fear. What the hell was that? Sarah's voice wobbled, but the question lingered thick in the air. Mark rushed to the window and peered through the glass, but darkness swallowed every vision outside. The woods were a tangled mass, shadows shifting like the foul breath of the hound. "We need to barricade," he whispered, urgency lacing his words. They scrambled to move furniture against the door, adrenaline fueling their frantic efforts as they braced themselves. The sound returned, scratching at the walls, scraping of claws against wood. Fear coiled around their throats. They were not just facing an unknown predator. They were on the edge of something ancient, something that had been waiting. But what had they awakened, and how could they silence its calls? Suddenly, a voice broke through the din, sharp and commanding. "It wants us. But more than that, it wants to be set free." The words tumbled from Dan's lips, each syllable trembling, mixing dread with revelation. Struck them, what if fleeing only invited it closer? Vulnerability clung to them like the frozen air they breathed. What had they disturbed in these woods? And now, trapped in the cabin, the darkness grew thicker, more sinister. Only then did they realize the worst was yet to come. The scratching persisted, relentless against the cabin walls. Each noise filled the air like a promise, one they wished they could deny but were trapped in all the same. Mark's heart raced, his fingers trembling as he gripped the small piece of wood, feeling it splinter beneath his grip. "What do you mean it wants to be set free?" Sarah's voice trembled, barely above a whisper, but her eyes burned with an urgency that felt palpable in the chilly air. She searched Dan's face for answers he didn't have. "I don't know," Dan practically shouted, his own fear spilling over in shaky breaths. "But it knows us. It knows our fears." The scratching grew louder, punctuated by a new sound, low, rumbled growls that blended with a chilling silence. It wasn't just one creature. Some part of Dan's gut told him it was a collective, an entity encircling them, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Let us get the windows," Mark yelled, breaking from the group to pull a cracked wooden board from the old walls. "We can't let it in." But before they could move, a loud thud reverberated against the door. They all jumped, denial etched across their faces. The entity wasn't just waiting anymore. It was pushing. Dan crawled toward the kitchen, pulling a rusty knife from the drawer, its blade glinting evilly in the firelight. "What if we try to talk to it?" His voice was quieter now, the truth of their predicament sinking in. "What if it wants something from us?" "Are you nuts?" Mark rounded on him. "You think it'll have a nice chat with us? Maybe we can reason with it, find out what it wants." Dan insisted, desperation painting his tone. There has to be a way. Suddenly, the growling escalated, and the presence loomed even larger outside. A living shadow against the dimness that pressed against the cabin like hands of ice. Sarah swung her eyes towards the door. What if it wants blood? The group shared a horrified glance. The weight of her words was suffocating, and a knot of ice settled in the pit of Mark's stomach. If it wants blood, that means we might have already lost. They froze, recalling the legends whispered around campfires, old tales of forgotten evils lurking deep in the woods. Then came another thunderous thud, this time against the window, rattling the fragile glass. Mark spun to face the sudden menace, the primal instinct to protect flaring within him as he raised the board. Back away, he screamed, his voice cracking under the strain of panic. The dark silhouette flared outside, sharp and belligerent. It was as if the very shadows themselves were animating. With a terrifying howl, the creature lunged at the cabin, smashing down the boarded door with a single swipe. Wood shards exploded like splinters of death, and the entity burst into the cabin. It leaped into the firelight, revealing its twisted form, a mix of human and something else, something grown in darkness, its eyes wide and beckoning. Run! Mark shouted, pushing Sarah toward the back exit, but the creature was fast. It lunged forward, its long, clawed fingers reaching for the two of them. Dan hesitated, staring at the thing, something beyond terror dancing in his thoughts. Is it really trying to consume us? Or is it searching for a connection? The question hung heavy, deadly, but before he could act, the monstrous bellow filled the air, drowning out everything rational. They bolted past Mark, the sound of their frantic steps swallowed by feral laughter that echoed in their minds. The chase danced through their heads as they raced through the cabin and out into the wilderness. But the fear felt different now. What if they weren't just fighting for survival? What if they were unleashing something far greater? As they scattered into the night, the shadows twisted around them like living smoke. They could hear the creature's laughter trailing behind them, mocking, knowing. In the cold air, as the darkness thickened around them, Dan turned back, heart pounding. What if this was all just a game, a game we never wanted to play? The question was lost in the night as they ran deeper into the woods, the haunting howl rising again, calling them back, wrapping around their very souls. They didn't know where to go. The woods felt endless, suffocating. But one thing was clear. Escape was only the beginning. Would they truly find a way to stop what had been unleashed? Or would they succumb to the shadows waiting to envelop them? Branches cracked beneath their hurried steps as they fled, each footfall echoing against the silence of the dark woods. The moon hung low, casting eerie shadows that twisted like the creature behind them. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, hunted. Keep moving, Sarah yelled, her breath warm in the biting cold. Her voice echoed with urgency, driving the group deeper into the encompassing woods. When they paused to catch their breath, Dan glanced back. The howling was gone, replaced by suffocating stillness. What if it's playing with us? He gasped, the weight of the wood's darkness pressing down, thickening the air. What if this is some twisted game to toy with our fears? Mark's heart pounded a counterpoint in his chest. Don't even say that. We need to figure out how to fight back, or he trailed off, the unspoken truth hanging heavily among them. What's the point in fighting something that knows us? Sarah replied, her voice edged with desperation. We can't predict its next move. They huddled against the gnarled trunk of an ancient tree, the gnarled bark rough against their backs. The shadows felt alive, breathing, watching. Dan's mind raced. He could feel the fear coiling like a snake ready to strike. But there was also a flicker of something else. Curiosity. Was this entity only driven by hunger, or did it seek something more? They could still hear the crackling of branches, a distinct and undeniable presence prowling close. Dan had to shout over the clamor of his thoughts. This isn't over. We're not just going to sit here and wait to be picked off one by one. Wait, Sarah interrupted, clutching Mark's arm tightly. What if we can lure it away? What if it's feeding off our fear? We need to turn it against itself. That's insane. Mark snapped, pulling away from her grip. It's going to tear through us before we even finish a plan. Maybe it feeds on more than just fear, Dan reasoned, desperation creeping into his voice. Stories say these things react to emotions: sadness, rage, connection. If we show it we're not afraid, maybe it will lose its hold over us. Or maybe we just become its next meal. Mark cried, but the flicker of hope sparked something deep inside him. They had to do something. Closer now, the entity's growl morphed into howls, reverberating in the air, promising chaos. Fine. Mark relented. What do we do? Together, Sarah encouraged, gripping her knife tightly. We face it together. We challenge it to confront us, somehow. If it craves connection, let us give it a reason to connect. They knew the risks were high, but they were out of options. They stepped away from the tree, hearts pounding as their breaths turned into ghosts in the chilling air. On three, we call it, Dan instructed, stealing a glance at their surroundings as darkness swirled menacingly around them. 1, 2, 3. They shouted into the night, their voices ringing out in unison. The woods answered with haunting silence. Suddenly, a massive shadow shifted just beyond the trees. It lumbered forward, eyes glowing with an unnatural light as it twisted in their direction. The trio stood frozen in fear, every instinct screaming at them to flee. But this time, they couldn't back down. They had to stand firm, ready to fight as the creature drew closer. Anticipation and terror churned within them. What were they about to unleash? Before they could process their next move, the darkness erupted, its form crackling with a terrifying energy as a voice, deep and guttural, slithered through the air. You called? Their hearts halted. Time seemed to stand still as the shadows grew longer, stretching towards them, hungry, insatiable. What would happen next? Were they ready for the confrontation that awaited in the dark? The air grew electric, as if charged by the creature's presence. Dan felt his skin prickle. It was a sensation he couldn't shake. They had sought it out. Now they stood face to face with whatever horror this forest had conjured. Show us what you really want, Mark shouted, his voice trembling but defiant. The moment felt surreal, as though each word hung in the air, suspended between hope and dread. The glowing eyes flared brighter, revealing the contours of a massive figure, its body twisting and shifting, blurring the lines of reality. You think you can challenge me? The voice rolled over them, deep and resonant, wrapping around their very thoughts. You are but sparks in the dark. Dan's heart raced. What did it mean? Were they simply prey in a game they didn't understand? Where fear reigned, how could they ever hope to win? We're not afraid, Sarah shouted, her own voice rising above the dread, surprising even herself. Her hands gripped the knife tighter, knuckles turning white. In that desperate moment, she wasn't filled with fear. She was filled with a surge of rebellious energy. If you feed on fear, then we'll show you something stronger. The beast paused, its movement fluid, almost hypnotic. The shimmering light of its eyes deepened, revealing striking tendrils of emotion intertwining like smoke. Stronger? What else could you possibly offer? Dan exchanged a glance with Sarah and Mark. They were in this together whether they were ready or not. Hope, he blurted out, the word tumbling from his lips before he could pull it back. Together we can summon it. The creature let out a low growl, almost mockingly. Hope? A flicker against the void? Amuse me. Together. Sarah screamed again, this time filled with an intensity that reverberated through the trees. They joined hands, forming a line of unity that cut through the darkness. We face you together. Show us your true form, and we'll show you what it means to believe. As if stirred by their words, the shadows around them swirled violently, the air sharp with an ominous energy. The creature's form quaked, shifting under their combined defiance. They could feel its power pressing against them, yet a tremor of something new coursed through the trio. Very well, its voice rippled with a mix of intrigue and disdain. Let us see what sparks can do against the abyss. The ground around them trembled. Leaves rustled violently as if swept by an unseen force. Marcus' heart pounded so loud he could barely think. We can do this, we just have to believe. We're stronger than our fears. In that moment, they began to take a step toward the entity. The darkness rumbled, seeming to fracture as raw emotions coursed through their hands. Hope, courage, a shared pulse of life against the despair that sought to swallow them whole. A blinding flash erupted, engulfing everything in white light. Dan squeezed his eyes shut, feeling a heat, an energy pushing against him. He could hardly breathe. Everything blurred into a chaotic swirl of colors and sounds. "What is happening?" he shouted, his voice barely audible over the roaring chaos. The ground beneath them shifted as if reality itself splintered. Time seemed to stretch, moments bleeding into one another. When Dan opened his eyes again, they stood in a clearing devoid of shadows. What had they unleashed? The air felt different, charged, electric. But where was the creature? Had they truly driven it away? Or had they opened an entirely new door to their doom? "Is it gone?" Sarah gasped, looking around in disbelief. "I don't know," Mark whispered, scanning for any movement. "But we can't stop. Whatever we did, we might need to fight it again." As the silence enveloped them, chilling and heavy, a whisper curled through the air, clear as ice. "You think this is over?" A sudden chill crept down Dana's spine. They hadn't escaped. They had merely begun. What awaited them next in this haunting wilderness? Would they face the creature again, or something even darker? The wind howled softly, a mournful sound that echoed through the clearing. Felt like a warning. Dan squinted into the woods, the treetops swaying ominously, shadowy fingers reaching out toward them, as if the forest itself was alive with anticipation. "What did we unleash?" Sarah whispered, her grip tightening around the knife. Mark stepped forward, his bravado starting to waver. "This isn't over. We need to figure out what happens next." Before he paused, swallowing hard, as if the words were too heavy to bear. "Before it finds us again." Just then, the ground beneath them shuddered. Dan instinctively fell back, his heart racing. They had thought they were free, but the answer was right before them, crawling just beneath the surface of the earth. "Do you feel that?" he asked, voice strained. "It's like something is lurking, something waiting to pounce." An unsettling pause hung in the air before exploding into action. A crack split the ground, jagged and cruel, and a spine-chilling growl reverberated from its depths. Panic surged through Dan. "Run!" he shouted, though he stood frozen momentarily, fighting the urge to flee without his friends. "Stay together," Sarah yelled, her voice a lifeline dragging him back to the moment. They turned, hearts pounding as they sprinted toward the treeline. Branches scratched at their faces, closing in like violent sentinels as they plunged deeper into the darkness. Dan felt a cold sweat trickle down his back. The growling had intensified, morphing into a low rumble that resonated through their bones. They needed to understand what they were facing. "What do we do?" Mark shouted, tripping slightly over a thick root. They scrambled to regain their footing, breathless and on edge. "We confront it." Sarah's voice rang with fierce determination. "We summoned it with our hope. Maybe we can send it back or make it see what we really are." Ahead of them, the trees parted slightly, revealing a small cluster of mist that spiraled and pulsed with a life of its own. Dan hesitated, drawn to it like a moth to a flame. The air around it shimmered mirage-like, promising secrets that edged at his mind. "We have to find the source," he managed to say, though uncertainty laced his words. With fear wrapped tightly around them, they pushed closer. Each step felt surreal, the world narrowing to just the three of them and the swirling mist, flickering with shades of silver and blue. The deeper they ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. Every sound amplified, a rustle here, a crack there, vibrating through them like an electric shock. As they approached, a figure emerged from the mist. It was slender, twisted, yet undeniably humanoid, with limbs that seemed to stretch at impossible angles. "You call upon hope?" it rasped, its voice dripping with mockery. Hope ephemeral, fleeting, how quaint. Trapped between fear and the raw belief that had brought them this far, Dan felt the color drain from his face. Before they could react, the figure lunged, shadows spilling out like an engulfing tide. "No!" Mark screamed. They stumbled back, all thoughts of fight replaced by sheer panic. The creature's presence flooded their senses, overpowering, suffocating. It wasn't just a shadowy monster. It was their collective fear made flesh. Summoning their courage, they joined hands once more. "We can't fall apart," Sarah cried out over the chaos, their shared warmth dissolving the dread. "Remember what we fought for. Belief binds us." But unseen forces pushed at them, trying to split the bond. "We need to believe harder," Dan shouted, his voice rising like a battle cry. And just when it seemed all hope was lost, a crack of lightning illuminated the clearing, revealing broken shadows peeling back. In that flash, Dan caught a glimpse of his own reflection, distorted, twisted by his own fears. "Together, we're stronger than this," Dan roared, as the others rallied behind him, their collective energy surging like an unstoppable wave. Would this unity be enough to pierce through the darkness? Or were they too late to escape the evil they had invited into their world? Just then, the mist thickened around them, whispering in dark rhythms that promised otherworldly truths, driving a wedge of uncertainty deep into their hearts. What awaited them in that pulse of shadow and light? What would they uncover in the depths of their own despair? The thundering silence shattered as the shadows twisted like serpents, pulling tight around them. Panic clawed at Dana's throat. It felt as if the very air conspired against them, thick with dread that made every breath harder to draw. They stood rooted, hands still clasped, yet the bonds forged by resolve wavered under the creature's weight. With a sudden burst, the figure lunged forward. Its limbs elongated grotesquely, nails sharper than knives, and hunger glinted in its eyes. In that instant, doubt crept in, darkness whispering that they were merely fools battling an inevitable fate. "Focus," Sarah shouted, not faltering even when the creature's breath came hot and rancid. "Feel the connection we created." Her voice ignited spark after spark of defiance. The ground shook again, this time a violent tremor. Dan felt his heart synchronize with the pulse of the earth, frantic and alive. With desperation boiling up inside him, he grappled for the hope Sarah had kindled. "We're not lost. We're not alone," he shouted, as if calling to the shadows themselves. The tendrils of mist swirled and churned, as if caught in an unseen whirlwind. The figure hesitated, confusion etched across its twisted face, now sharply illuminated by another flash of eerie lightning. They saw it more clearly now, its skin mottled and bruised, reflecting a sorrow that struck Dana's core. "Together," Mark bellowed, a fierce note of determination rising through the fear. "We need to drive this thing back." With their grip tightening, the trio poured their belief, aspirations, and pain into that moment, a united front against despair. A glowing orb of their combined energy flickered into existence, pulsating fiercely like a heartbeat. The realization washed over Dan like cold water, awakening something within. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were battling for the essence of who they were. Eagerly, he stepped forward, letting go of fear and channeling the warmth of his friends. "We're stronger. We know love exists," the figure snarled, momentarily retreating as if recoiling from the light. That feeble pause fueled them further. They felt the ground responding to their energy, trembling less from fear and more from a gathering strength. "Show it your fears," boomed Mark. "Face it with your truth." They focused harder, conjuring their deepest memories. The laughter shared around campfires, the warmth of an embrace, the dream of a better tomorrow. The shadows writhed wildly, sucked toward that core of authenticity, twisting and warping. But just when victory felt near, a terrible wail erupted from the creature, a lament that sent shudders through the clearing. The mist thickened again, clawing at their resolve, whispering temptations of doubt and despair. Shadows circled, sowing unrest, like a dark tide trying to drown their brightness. "I want let this end," Sarah shrieked, and at her defiance, the ground beneath them swelled. Roots and vines burst forth, anchoring them together while pushing back against the creature's influence. It clawed at their unity with all furor, but their bonds were stronger. They pushed out raw energy, their radiant hope spiraling through the void. The glow brightened, illuminating the surroundings as if promising the dawn was just beyond the horizon. The creature reared back, burning, screaming in terror as the light intensified. And then it happened, the ground split again, wider, screaming, inviting nothing but darkness to rise once more. Dan couldn't tell if it was anger or fear, but it fueled their flight or fight instinct as shadows loomed larger. In that moment, a vision flashed before Dan's eyes, faces lost, lives taken. The truth of it scattered his focus, a painful reflection of their own fragile humanity. It won't end like this, he cried, clenching his fists, determination swirling with dread. That fractured heartbeat beckoned him on, toward the depths of a darkness that promised revelation. What lay beneath had been waiting for them. The scars human beings bear, the fears they hide, it was calling. Let us go deeper, Dan urged, and as their hearts raced, they thrust forward into the unknown. What would the shadows reveal? Would they finally confront the needle-thin barrier between fear and hope? Or plunge further into a dread that promised to change everything they knew? A deafening roar pierced the night as they plunged into the churning darkness. The air turned frigid, and a wave of energy crashed over them, the kind that sparks an instinctual fight or flight response deep within the soul. Dan's heart pounded violently, but he pressed forward, tethered to Sarah and Mark. As they descended into the soggy earth, a sense of weightlessness enveloped them, like stepping off a ledge. They felt the shadows reaching for them, and fear rippled through Dan's chest. What if this is a trap? He thought, the words echoing ominously in his mind. But the warmth of Sarah's clasp jolted him. We can't turn back, she whispered, eyes shining with fierce resolve. Flashlights became futile in this abyss, their combined light flickered and waned, swallowed by looming darkness. Then, just as the shadows thickened, a whisper reached them, curling around their minds like smoke. You shouldn't have come here. The voice, raspy and cold, wrapped around Dan's heart. It felt alive, crawling along his skin, pricking every nerve. Who are you? Mark shouted, his voice cracking with fear. What do you want? A silence fell, heavy and oppressive, before the ground bucked violently. The trio clung to each other as a chorus of anguished cries split the air. Faces materialized in the darkness, ghostly images, eyes pleading and terrified. Dan recognized the expressions, lost souls, trapped in despair. Every smooth surface of the earth around them transformed into a distorted reflection of frozen screams. The sight hit Dan like a punch to the gut, the realization that these weren't just shadows. They were remnants of those swept away by fear and pain, victims of the very darkness they now confronted. What is this place? Sarah uttered through trembling lips. The vision was unbearable, surfacing memories too painful to confront. Don't let them in, Dan cried, forcing his thoughts back. Drawing on the bonds they forged, he shouted to the apparitions, "You're not alone. We're here." The shadows pulsed as if responding to his words, drawing closer, grasping at their tether to reality. An endless barrage of whispers surrounded them, growing louder, urging them to give in to despair. He will find you. It's only a matter of time. Trying to drown out the cacophony, Dan concentrated, focusing on the glowing orb still hovering near them. It flickered like hope clinging to a thread, desperate to endure. We have to channel this together. Think of your happiest moments. Lightning broke overhead, illuminating their surroundings in a flash of white brilliance. And in that blinding glare, Dan saw something shift. The landscape morphed, revealing a crumbling path that spiraled deeper into the heart of darkness. Look, there. Sarah pointed, her voice a sharpened dagger cutting through the dissonance. It's leading somewhere. With unyielding determination, they charged down the path, the whispers spiraling into a tornado of hatred and grief behind them. But the flickering orb grew stronger with every step, pulling them through the chaos, illuminating the very shadows that sought to ensnare them. Yet uncertainty gnawed at the edges of Dan's heart. Something else was waiting, something vile, coiled up in the dark, unseen but palpably real. With every footfall, He could feel the ground pulse with a malevolence hungry for their defeat. "Where does this lead?" Mark shouted, his voice strained, trying to regain control over their fraying morale. "I don't know," Dan gasped, glancing back briefly. The shadows had coalesced like a monstrous wave, about to crash upon them. But as fear and desperation swirled, a lone figure suddenly appeared at the end of the tunnel, illuminated in the energy of their light. Standing tall among the swirling chaos, it wore a familiar expression, one that struck Dan to his core, a kindred spirit, but obscured in shrouds of shadow. "Who are you?" Dan breathed, feeling an overwhelming mix of fear and hope. As the figure took a step closer, the shadows thickened, surging with rage, and a chilling laugh echoed through the void. What did this figure represent? Friend or foe? And would it guide them to salvation or deeper into their doom? The air crackled with tension, an energy waiting to ignite into chaos. Together Sarah urged, her grip tightening on Dana's hand. But beneath the surface, a darkness swelled, ready to explode. Would they unravel the mystery or be consumed by the very shadows they sought to conquer? The figure stepped closer, the shadows swirling around it like dark tendrils reaching into the night. Dan squinted, trying to make out the details of its face, clinging desperately to his flickering hope. There was something familiar about the silhouette, a hint of recognition cloaked in fear. As the shadows writhed, they whispered secrets not meant for mortal ears. "He"'s coming. The voice carried a sense of foreboding, settling in Dana's gut like a stone. "You cannot escape." Mark's breath came out ragged, and he turned to Sarah, panic etched across his features. "What do we do? Are we supposed to trust that thing?" The uncertainty hung heavily in the air. Sarah's voice cracked. "Do you think it's someone we know?" Before Dan could answer, the figure stepped into the light, and recognition flooded through him. It's Emily," he gasped, eyes wide with a mix of terror and longing. Emily, a lifelong friend lost in the depths of their past. "But how? We thought you were gone," Emily finished, her eyes glimmering with some unholy fire. But I learned things about this place. I know its darkness craves what you hold most dear." The shadows around her growled, and the ground trembled as if warning them against the truth. "The shadows thrive on suffering," Emily continued, her eyes hardening. "You have to choose, Dan. To seek the light, you must confront the darkness. It will feed on your fears until you break." Dan's heart raced. Choices weighed heavily, like chains on his ankles. "What do I have to do?" He barely managed to whisper. Fear coiled within him, squeezing tight. He didn't know if he could bear another loss. Not again. "Together," Sarah echoed, drawing closer to Dan, her presence grounding him. "We face this together." A shake of Emily's head brought a chill to the air. "Alone you may survive. Together you may destroy. But I warn you, every choice comes with a price." The shadows whispered louder in response, weaving chaos as they drew closer to the trio. "Leave. Leave now," they hissed, eyes reflecting the agony that tormented the souls trapped within. "Go, Emily," Dan shouted, defiance rising in him like a flame amid the cold. "We won't let it take anyone else." Emily smiled, a flicker of warmth illuminating her features, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "You want to save them? You must be willing to sacrifice. Can you bear the weight of their pain?" Then came the rumble. An earthquake of sorrow rippled through the ground beneath them. Faces twisted in agony flashed in the shadows, screaming silently, begging for release. Dan staggered backward, horror clawing at him. "Dan!" Sarah cried out as she fell to her knees, covering her ears. The whispers crescendoed into a tormenting roar, drowning out everything. "They're everywhere. We can't breathe." His heart raced, instinct screaming at him. He locked eyes with Emily. "How do we stop this?" "Confront what binds you," she shouted, her voice strained. "Embrace the pain. Only then can the light break through." A blinding light flickered from the orb they had brought, and Dana's heart pounded with determination. In a burst of courage, he yelled, "I won't run from my past anymore." As the shadows lunged forward, he squeezed Sarah's hand tight. A surge of energy erupted from the orb, illuminating the pitch-black abyss. The memories surged forth, faces of loved ones lost, raw wounds that festered in his heart. He embraced it all, fuel pouring into the fire of their shared courage. But a voice, darker than the night itself, dripped into his mind. You think you can win? This is only the beginning. The light pulsed and expanded, a beacon against the shadowy tide. But Dan felt the darkness clawing back. Would their sacrifice be enough? Could they really confront the echo of their fears? Stand firm, Sarah encouraged, rallying her strength. But the shadows soured, thrashing violently against their newfound light. And then he understood the battle had only just begun. What price would they really have to pay to escape the clutches of this despair? A monstrous wail echoed through the forest, resonating with the pain of the shadows that threatened to consume them. Dan stood tall, determined, but inside, dread twisted like a knife. He tightened his grip on Sarah's hand, feeling the warmth of her courage intertwined with his fear. "We're not backing down," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We'll confront this darkness. Together." The glow from the orb pulsed harder, casting flickering shadows that danced along the treetops. The figures of trapped souls flitted in and out of view, but they didn't scare him now. Their frozen faces reminded him of what was truly at stake. The realization struck with such force that it almost knocked the breath from his lungs. Their fears were a collective weight pulling them down. "Embrace it," shouted Mark, his voice filled with fervor as he positioned herself beside Dan and Sarah. "We can't let it have the last word." The shadows writhed violently at their feet, whispering threats and taunting failures. Dan's chest tightened as the shadows curled around him, each tendril a memory he tried to suppress. He saw flashbacks of loss, moments when laughter turned to screams, faces he failed to save. "You're my pain," he whispered to the darkness, "but you control me." With every ounce of courage he possessed, Dan stepped closer to the swirling chaos. The figure of Emily flickered beside him, her presence a reminder of the light that once burned brightly. "Do not hide from your past. Face it." Her voice rang through the heavy air, pushing them forward. "Only then will you find your strength." The shadows recoiled as if struck, but not for long. They surged back, howling with rage, demanding to be fed. Dan shouted louder, urging the others to join him. "We're not afraid of you. We won't be defined by our scars." His friends fell in line beside him, their hands forming a chain of resolve. Together, they summoned their collective energy, channeling every ounce of belief they had. Hope soared, filling the air with warmth that cut through the lingering frost. The darkness trembled before their united front, but it wasn't enough. Fear still clung to the edges of their resolve. "Feel it," Dan urged, breathless and intense. "Acknowledge the hurt, the sadness, honor it, instead of allowing it to defeat you." As if obeying his voice, the memories surged, each one crashing over them like a wave. Laughter, loss, connection. They embraced everything in their hearts, knowing it was part of their journey. "We are our stories," Sarah cried out, her voice ringing through the cacophony. "We won't let you twist them into terror." A blinding light erupted from their call, pushing back the shadows that swirled and howled. The darkness reared back, forming a monstrous silhouette against the glow. Dan's heart surged with vigor, daring to confront the beast. The creature's visage distorted, but blinding light erupted around them, revealing hidden pathways through the darkness, illuminating the faces of those it had claimed. Together, Mark roared, taking a bold step forward. They moved in synchrony as their pulse quickened, their resolve cleaving the darkness surrounding them. With desperation bubbling within, they raised their hands, presenting a barrier of light that held all their hope. The creature paused, uncertainty flickering in its otherworldly eyes. "You think this is enough?" it snarled, its voice dripping with disdain. "Hope is fragile, but I am eternal. We're stronger than you think." Dan shouted, a flicker of defiance igniting in his chest. "We've faced our past and emerged. You're just a twisted reflection of what we were." With that defiance, they hurled their collective pain and remembrance into the light, allowing it to manifest into a radiant flood. It glimmered like starlight, swirling, dancing. The shadows howled a cacophony of anger and sorrow as the tides of darkness began to recede. "Keep going," Sarah shouted, every word a clarion call. "Let it know it has no hold over us." Together they surged forward, light bursting from their joined voices, breaking through the entity's defenses. The energy crackled, shattering illusions as it swept away tendrils that sought to ensnare them. The beast shrieked, the sound clawing at Dan's senses. "You cannot escape me. I will always be a part of you. Then we'll embrace that," Mark yelled, finding strength in the chaos. "We'll fight for our light. It'll only grow brighter with every challenge." The shadows quaked, and the energy from their connection cascaded, pushing back against the encroaching darkness. "Push," Dan urged, all their energy consolidating into a single pulse as they charged ahead. They let everything flow, a torrent of love, loss, laughter. With every ounce of strength, they allowed the darkness to dissipate, shattering the grip it had held for so long. And then, in one enormous surge, the figure of the monstrous entity recoiled, its screams echoing as the dark veil tore away. Light flooded the clearing, engulfing them, chasing the darkness into the far corners of the night. As the shadows retreated, Dan felt a warm embrace wash over him, clean, pure. The air shimmered, vibrating with energy, while the ghostly figures of trapped souls began to dissolve, smiles breaking through their tears. In that moment they were free. The forest sighed, the oppressive air lifting as the light settled like a blanket. Dan, Sarah, and Mark stood panting but united, their bond forged in the depths of despair, giving them powerful resilience. "We did it," Sarah murmured, tears glistening in her eyes. Mark smiled, hope shining brighter than ever. "We faced our darkness and emerged stronger." Together, Dan nodded, a sense of calm sweeping over him. "And remember it, we carry both our light and darkness together." As they stood in the aftermath, the wilderness transformed, life rekindling around them. The trees sighed, and the whisper of the wind felt like a promise. They knew this chapter of struggle had forged a new beginning, a chance to rise from their burdens, fearless and whole. And in the dawning light, they would face whatever the future held, together. Now that you've reached the astounding conclusion of this adventure, don't miss out on what's next. You need to subscribe immediately to the channel to stay updated with our exclusive stories and mind-blowing journeys. Smash that like button now to help our algorithm thrive. Your support means the world. Flood the comments section with your reactions and theories about the ending. We want to hear from you. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to catch this thrilling conclusion. Only true fans understand the magic of supporting the channel through these actions.